In the last two videos, we've covered basic electrical theory and how to calculate the power needs for your bow fishing setup. We've explored how to use batteries, generators, and AC to DC converters to give you the flexibility to run all night long. However, to truly do this subject justice, we still need to dive a little deeper. First, it's a misconception that batteries run at just 12 volts DC. In fact, a fully charged battery is going to put out closer to 12.8 volts at full charge. And as you discharge the battery, the voltage will drop lower and lower. If you remember in our previous video, we said that amp draw on your boat is based on the wattage divided by the voltage. Now, since the wattage requirement doesn't change, and the voltage does, the amp draw actually increases as the battery discharges. And this higher amperage can cause problems if you don't plan for it. Here's an example. If we have a 50-watt light at 12.8 volts, we have an amp draw of 3.9 amps. But if we run the battery down to 11 volts, that same light now has an amp draw of 4.5 amps. That may not seem like a lot, but if you're running 5 lights in the same circuit, that's 3 more amps than when you started. So what's affected when that amperage increases? Well, your wiring may start to become hot, especially if it's not large enough, and it can even start to melt. Also, switches that are close to their rated capacity could start to melt as well. I've even seen the fuses in a converter melt because the amp load exceeded the rated capacity of the converter. This type of problem doesn't always happen right away. It can happen over time, especially if you run your battery voltages low on a regular basis. And when it does happen, it usually is not an easy fix, and it can ruin components in your system. So to avoid this condition, make sure you have your circuit sized to avoid excessive amperage loads. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there's also a need to monitor high voltage situations. This isn't a concern if you're only running one battery, but if you start to run multiple batteries in series to get 24 or 36 volts, or if you're running voltage converters, there are things that you should be aware of. First, not all components are rated to accept 24 or 36 volts, but your lights and your trolling motor may require that additional voltage. So only provide higher voltage to these devices. Now you can still pull 12 volts off of each battery as needed, but make sure that the devices connected for 12 volts are balanced across the batteries to prevent one battery from discharging faster than the others. Here's a diagram that shows what I'm talking about. Your lights and your trolling motor are arranged to pull 24 volts, and the interior lights, the GPS unit, the running lights, and the stern light are all drawing 12 volts. When you introduce converters into the setup, the biggest concern is making sure that you are not pumping too much voltage into the batteries and the attached circuits. I mentioned in my last video that converters can charge batteries, and PowerMax converters have 3 different charging stages, which decrease over time as the battery charges. If the battery requires it, the converter starts with surge charging at 14.6 volts. Which then drops to bulk charging at 13.6 volts, and finally to a maintenance charge at 13.2 volts, which keeps the batteries topped off. They also have a fixed power supply option mode that gives you the ability to provide a constant charge at a set voltage ranging from 13 to 16.5 volts. If you start the night with low batteries and expect the converters to carry the load while the batteries charge, they will generate 14.6 volts. And for 2 converters, you could be pumping more than 29 volts to your 24 volt devices. A good bet is to get a converter that can put out a constant voltage and set it slightly in excess of 13 volts. And try to keep the batteries charged, both on and off the water. If not charged regularly, lead acid and absorbed glass mat or AGM batteries can experience a condition called sulfation. This buildup of lead sulfate crystals is the #1 cause for early battery failure. Sulfated batteries can experience loss of cranking power, longer charging times, excessive heat buildup, shorter discharge times between charges, and dramatically shorter battery life overall. It's sometimes possible to restore a sulfated battery using special equipment and high voltage charging. But it's better to establish a regimen where you keep your batteries charged above 12.4 volts to avoid the condition altogether. And if you're not using your batteries regularly, you should consider keeping a maintenance charge on your batteries and try to keep them in a cool place. A battery left uncharged in hot weather can lose 5% or more of its charge, every month. In my earlier video, I mentioned that a good, workable rule of thumb is to not just charge deep cycle lead acid or AGM batteries more than 50% of their rated capacity, because drawing these batteries down lower could cause permanent damage and lead to premature failure. However, thanks to newer battery technologies, there's now a new kid on the block that is really making waves in the fishing world, and that is lithium iron phosphate batteries. Lithium iron phosphate batteries have significant advantages over lead acid and AGM batteries, and the first of these is weight. In a quick search, I found multiple 31 series AGM and lead acid batteries rated at 100 amp hours, and they all weighed in the 64 to 67 pound range. Now compare that to a measly 27 pounds for a comparable lithium iron phosphate battery, and you could instantly shed 120 pounds from your boat if you're running a 36 volt setup. Also, lithium iron phosphate batteries can be deeply discharged to 80% or more of their rated capacity over thousands of cycles. In fact, the number of charge cycles can be as much as 10 times higher than you would get from lead acid batteries. And lithium batteries can last in excess of 5 years or more with proper maintenance. Additionally, these batteries discharge at a flat rate, meaning that the voltage maintains at 12.8 volts over the period of the discharge cycle, rather than dropping in voltage, as with lead acid batteries. This will help protect your circuits from the overcurrent situations I described earlier in the video. Finally, most automotive or marine-capable lithium iron phosphate batteries come with a built-in battery management system, or a BMS, which protects the battery from being overcharged or over-discharged. The BMS can also prevent excessive current draws and short circuits, and some of the best BMSs can also protect the battery from getting too hot or too cold, which prolongs the battery's life even more. Now, if you're like me, you're salivating over switching to lithium iron phosphate batteries. But it's important to know that the cost is typically about 2 to 3 times that of lead acid batteries. However, the prices keep coming down as more competition finds its way into the marketplace. I would be doing everyone a disservice by recommending one brand over another, but at a minimum, look for batteries that offer grade A cells and a battery management system built in. When it comes to charging lithium iron phosphate batteries, the claims are that they can be charged more rapidly and with a higher voltage than lead acid batteries. According to PowerMax, all of their newer converters are lithium iron phosphate compatible and capable of charging at an ideal voltage of 14.4 volts. This sounds good for charging only situations, but remember that out on the water, if you're pumping 14.4 volts to each battery in a 36 volt system, you're going to have 43.2 volts at the trolling motor, which was only expecting to see 38.4 volts at a maximum. In that case, it would be better to limit the charging to only 13.2 volts on each converter when you're out on the water. And then you can turn the converters up to 14.4 volts if you want to top your batteries off, but when you get home. Advances in battery technology are driving our futures from the roads to the waters. And although many believe that we are still years away, the shift is apparent and accelerating. I know that I will be upgrading to lithium iron phosphate batteries this coming year, and I look forward to the extended run times and the weight savings that will offer me. As always, if you found this information to be helpful, please like and subscribe to this channel. In our next video, we'll be looking at advances in LED lighting technology and how color spectrum should play into your decision when choosing the right light for your setup. Please let us know if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to address them in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching This Week in Bowfishing.